Wildermyth is a paper theatre for role-playing adventures. The game sets up a world for you to adventure in and then tasks you with leading a party of heroes to save that world across several campaigns. Each scenario will draw from one of 5 antagonist factions as the pervasive threat, but you can encounter a range of monsters that need to be put to the sword, arrow, or the wrong end of an exploding workbench. Save villages, deal with encroaching armies, and face off with the big bad. Then it's home in time for tea and delicious crumpets, assuming that is that you are prepared to wait multiple years for your toasted treat, as adventures take place over years and it takes a long time to walk from one side of the map to the other. Longer if you get distracted by glowing whatsits in the woods or by climbing a mountain to sample a weirdo's baked goods. Time is of the essence, and problems can occur all over the game map, so you are likely to have to split up your merry band of adventurers to deal with all the threats. As one unit, your party is a wrecking ball. As smaller groups, you're much more likely to be chopped up into little bits and then have those bits chewed up and spat out and then reanimated into bizarre corpse monsters. Better get your game face on then. Thematically, Wildermyth is a game about the passage of time and decay and metamorphosis. Across the course of each campaign, your characters will age and, in all likelihood, transform into something completely different than they began. Story events will occur that can see your character become a human-animal hybrid or become infused with rock or some other physical distortion. These events add to the abilities of your character, but not render them useless. Ultimately, even if they survive the horrors of war, they'll be forced to retire from a life of adventuring. Consequently, part of managing a party involves bringing through fresh blood and developing their skills to ensure that when time catches up with your favourite party member, your overall objectives can still be met. Player characters are broadly divided into 3 classes: warrior, mage and archer, with each being able to bring a suite of useful skills to the battlefield. Importantly, all 3 are viable and useful to have around, although you will want to go into combat with one of each, at least, in order to benefit from the ways in which their skill sets complement each other. As you are required to split your forces, however, this becomes a delicate balance to strike. Broadly speaking, your warrior is your tank and single target damage dealer, whilst the mage deals in crowd control and the archer pins individual targets, debuffs and moves rapidly for flanking actions. Again though, over the course of an adventure, and even possibly over the course of an individual battle, these roles can shift dynamically, and so overall battle plans are less important than being able to react to situations on the fly. Outside of the meat and potatoes of combat, your PCs are continually drawn into small character and story moments. They develop friendships and rivalries within the group, which you have some influence over, as well as having their own whims and motivations, although these can seem to drop completely out of the blue. These character beats are at once Wildermyth's asset and detriment. On the one hand, these moments are delivered in a charming manner and are often pleasantly surprising. On the other, the game has a sense of who your character is beyond what you might envisage for them. Big Angus McStabbins might have been a scourge of the underworld and bathed in the blood of countless enemies, but if the game decides that he suddenly develops an interest in arcane enchantments, then that's what happens. And you might embark on a sub-story about Angus searching for a magical tome that, to your mind, is completely out of character. Turn-based battles using a grid system for movement and targeting. This is exactly the kind of fighting I enjoy. Think XCOM style, where you move, attack and activate an ability for each combatant, and then the enemies take their turn, popping up in uncomfortable positions on the map and forcing you to change up your plans turn by turn. As mentioned earlier, your characters have defined roles on the battlefield and are all useful for navigating the different scenarios without taking losses. As you stack up the wins, your characters will level up, granting access to new abilities and allowing you to fine-tune your approach to combat. Once you gain access to Overwatch-like Guardian skills for your warriors, it's a lot easier to protect your squishier party members, and that's important because the monsters can dish out a lot of punishment if they are allowed to wander into the midst of your ranks. Mage characters have the ability to infuse with objects on the battlefield, which serves a multitude of purposes. Perhaps the most important of which is that they can see through those objects, which grants an enhanced field of vision on the battlefield. Knowing that half a dozen monstrosities are about to come scuttling around the corner is useful ahead of time, so that you can lay traps with your archer or move your tankier guys to interrupt. The art of the game is in the style of a comic book, combined with a paper theatre. Depending on your frame of reference, you might see this as childlike and whimsical, or perhaps you might be reminded of things like the Pathfinder cutout minis. The lack of animation and obvious sagedness of the gameplay screens do serve to keep the player distanced from the characters in the party. In order to make sure that all characters fit into the confines of the predetermined random story events, they all have a genericness to them, which is fine for the fast-paced storytelling and quick combat scenarios. It would have been nice to have had some more player-controlled customization options. I'd like my fighter big and red so that they stand out on the battlefield more, for example. But at least equipment you give your team is represented on the models in battle and, to some extent, the story sections. A special nod to the meaty combat sound effects that really add to the immersion and visceral feeling of the combat. Rocks crumble apart and wood smashes to splinters with a chunky accompaniment that adds weight to proceedings. Likewise, when you strike an enemy, you know you're giving them a thorough smack about the chops, or whatever appendage is most appropriate for some of the weirder ones. Where exactly is the best place to stick your sword into a wardrobe monster? I'm not 100% sure on that. Whilst I think the art style is different enough to make the game stand out, I did think that the disconnect I felt from the game world was a detriment to the overall enjoyment and involvement and engagement. Kudos to the design team for thoroughly realising their vision, though, and making it different while still narratively appropriate. It's difficult for me to give Wildermyth an unqualified recommendation despite its solid battle system and unique storytelling approach. My biggest problem with the game is how it squeezes your characters into its predefined story beats, even though it might make no sense in context. That's a bit obtuse, so let me give you an example. A story event occurred when my party decided to climb a mountain. At the top was an isolated cottage that was home to a warlock. He seemed pleasant enough, but he had us fight against some monsters he created, and as a consequence, one of my party members was killed. Now, this character had a love interest in the party, and she had been stood next to him when he was brutally murdered by these monsters. Yet she cheerfully accepted griddle cakes from the warlock in the post-combat story scene. That doesn't make a lick of sense. Now, although you might not hit on anything quite so immersion-breaking in every campaign you play, the potential for something similar to occur is huge. Now, it's quite possible to enjoy Wildermyth in spite of these character story breakdowns or just for the fun strategic combat. But for me, these moments killed my enthusiasm for the stories being told and ultimately kind of soured me on the whole experience. That is entirely a matter of personal preference though, so I totally understand if it's not an issue for many other players. Overall, it's a good solid game. But there are some things to be aware of if you're a big RPG-er.